December 3rd is one day after the official start of Hanukkah, about 2.5 weeks from the official start of winter, and just over 3 weeks from Christmas. And we thank you for spending 10 minutes of it with CNN 10. I'm Carl Azus. We start today by remembering America's 41st president. George Herbert Walker Bush served as U.S. leader from 1989 through 1993. Before he passed away on Friday, he was the nation's oldest living president. In fact, he was the longest living president in U.S. history at more than 94 years and 5 months old. President Jimmy Carter is now the nation's oldest living president. He's also 94, but he was born a few months after President Bush. The 41st U.S. leader had a pretty remarkable life. When he became a pilot for the U.S. Navy in 1943, he was the branch's youngest pilot at the time. He flew 58 combat missions during World War II, earning 3 Air Medals and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He played in the first 2 College World Series baseball games in 1947 and 1948, and that was all before he even entered politics. And when George H.W. Bush was elected to the presidency in 1988, he was the first sitting vice president to do that since Martin Van Buren in 1836. It wasn't just his political life that made history, though. In January, the former president and his wife, Barbara, set the high mark for the longest married presidential couple. They'd been together for 73 years. Former First Lady Barbara Bush passed away on April 17th. Her husband, a man remembered by his sons as a wonderful dad, followed on November 30th.
George Herbert Walker Bush was born in Milton, Massachusetts on June 12, 1924. The son of a future U.S. Senator, he married Barbara Pierce. They had 6 children. 2 would follow his footsteps into public life.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
In 2001, his eldest son, Texas Governor George Walker Bush, became the 43rd president, the first since John Quincy Adams to follow his father into the White House.
I'm now about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
His second son, Jeb Bush, served 2 terms as Florida governor, and in 2016 unsuccessfully ran for the Republican presidential nomination. After earning a degree at Yale, the elder Bush moved his family to Texas, where he made a fortune in the oil business. There, his budding interest in Republican politics blossomed. That one fact helped Bush become elected to 2 terms as a congressman, but he was defeated in 2 subsequent bids for the U.S. Senate. His disappointment didn't last long.
We view this item as so seriously that we consider it a possible turning point in the history of the United Nations.
His political profile was high enough that President Nixon appointed him U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Later, he became chairman of the Republican National Committee. President Ford sent him to China to head up the U.S. liaison office as part of a new initiative in U.S.-Chinese relations. And in 1975, Bush came home to become director of the CIA, a job associates said he truly loved. He left that job when Democrat Jimmy Carter became president and soon became a player in national Republican politics. Bush ran against Ronald Reagan in the 1980 GOP primaries, winning some, but eventually withdrawing when it became clear he wouldn't be the nominee. But Reagan believed the Texas oilman could help him win over the party's moderates and named him as his running mate. As vice president, Bush spent a lot of time on the road, and he was Reagan's heir apparent in 1988.
I want a kinder and gentler nation, like 1,000 points of light in a broad and peaceful sky.
He also made a campaign promise that would come back to haunt him.
Read my lips. No new taxes.
His selection of a running mate surprised many.
My choice for the vice presidency is Senator Dan Quayle of Indiana.
But voters supported the ticket.
So help me God.
As the nation's 41st president, Bush's focus returned to international affairs. He presided over the collapse of communism in the former Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. He ordered U.S. troops into Latin America to capture Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega.
The responsibility for sending someone's son and today daughter into harm's way rests on the shoulders of the president. So it is the most difficult decision.
He would order U.S. troops into combat again, allied with dozens of other countries to free Kuwait from Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein's aggression. The first Gulf War didn't last long. In less than 6 weeks, the Iraqis were booted from Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein remained in power and held a grudge. Years later, a car bombing plot hatched in Iraq targeted Mr. Bush during a visit to Kuwait.
If you got to have security, if I have to have it with the Secret Service, I've got the best there is, and we will continue to be careful.
The United States retaliated with a missile attack against Iraq's intelligence headquarters. The man behind the plot would not be captured for another decade. And the second President Bush ordered a U.S. invasion of Iraq.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
At home, President Bush was hammered by critics for compromising with Congress on tax increases and breaking his no new taxes promises.
Well, it was a mistake to go along with the Democratic tax increase. And I admit it.
In a three-way battle with Bill Clinton and Ross Perot, he lost. He lived long enough to see his son accomplish what he did not, win a second term in the White House.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
At his son's request, he also briefly re-entered the public spotlight.
In the aftermath of the devastating tsunami,
He joined with former President Bill Clinton to help raise money for victims of the 2004 earthquake and tsunamis in Asia. The two reunited in late 2005 to help the victims of Hurricane Katrina. As a young Navy pilot, Bush's plane was shot down and he had to bail out over the Pacific. As a far older man, he would jump from planes again to celebrate his 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays.
It feels good. There's an exhilaration. It sends a message around with these guys all around the globe that just because you're an old guy, you don't have to sit around drooling in the corner. Get out and do something. Get out and enjoy life.
It was a life that brought George Herbert Walker Bush back to the White House in 2011 to receive the nation's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Those of you who know him, this is a gentleman, inspiring citizens to become points of light in service to others. His life is a testament that public service is a noble calling.
At his beloved wife Barbara's funeral, President Bush posed for a photo with other surviving former presidents. The years had taken their toll on his body, but his dignity and resolve shined through, part of a graceful final act in a life of public service.
I do not fear what is ahead, for our problems are large, but our heart is larger. Our challenges are great, but our will is greater.
10-second trivia. Which U.S. state sees the most earthquakes? Alaska, California, Hawaii, or Arizona? The United States Geological Survey says Alaska is the most seismically active state in the country. But even though a major magnitude 7 earthquake struck near the Alaskan city of Anchorage Friday, most businesses, airports, hospitals, and emergency services were up and running on Sunday, and officials say no deaths or serious injuries were reported. The city's mayor says this is a demonstration that Anchorage is prepared for this kind of emergency. Still, power was knocked out for many residents, roads were ripped apart, buildings were damaged, and more than 1,000 aftershocks of magnitude 1.5 or greater have struck since Friday's quake. Schools in Anchorage are closed today and tomorrow, and Alaska's governor has made a disaster declaration to quickly get money and resources to those who need them. A seismologist says the quake was felt as far as 400 miles away, and that this was the most significant tremor that Anchorage had experienced since a historic 9.2 magnitude quake struck in 1964. Alaska is located along the Pacific Ring of Fire, a region shaped like a horseshoe where most of the world's seismic activity takes place. Basketball teams that face Texas's Splendora High School could have a unique challenge to grapple with: twins. Not just one set where players might have trouble keeping track of who has the ball, but there are 6 sets of twins playing on the boys and girls teams. And to make this twice as crazy, both teams' coaches are parents of twins. One coach calls it a blessing because of how they connect, work together, compete, and support one another. Guess that's right up their alley-oop. And no matter how the game goes, double-doubles are always part of it. The 6th man is probably related to someone on the court, and 2-pointers are everywhere you look. Wonder how they'd stack up against a triplet threat. Keeping up with that could make anyone a basket case. I'm Carl Azus for CNN.